My fiancé's ex-wife stormed in with a fake child, lying it was the son of my ex-husband and me, but I shattered her scheme with one cold move. I'm 28 years old, female, and I had been engaged to my fiancé, Terry, who is 30 years old, male, for about 8 months. We got married last week, but unfortunately, the ceremony didn't go as smoothly as we'd planned because Terry's ex-wife suddenly reappeared right before our vows. Terry has been married before to his high school sweetheart, Eliza, who is also 30 years old, female. They were together for 3 years before they went their separate ways. It was Eliza's decision to file for divorce because she wanted to quit her job and be a housewife, but Terry wasn't making enough money to support them both at the time, which led to a lot of fights. It was Terry who did all the work at home, Terry who brought home more money, and Terry who tried to make up with her after every fight. All Eliza did was work and then come home and complain about how Terry was forcing her to work when she didn't enjoy it, without appreciating any of the things he did at home. He did all the dishes and the laundry and kept the entire house clean so she wouldn't have to take on any more work alongside her job, but she still wasn't happy. Terry suggested that they move into a smaller apartment to save on rent and cut costs so she could quit her job, but she wasn't willing to compromise on their lifestyle either. I can't imagine living with someone so difficult to deal with, and I don't really understand how Terry managed to put up with her for 3 years before finally calling it quits. About 6 years ago, their marriage came to an end, and since that time, they've had no direct contact. She made several attempts to reach out to him post-divorce, but he was resolute in cutting off communication. He blocked her number, changed his contact details, and even instructed mutual friends to keep his new information private. During the divorce proceedings, she had pushed for alimony, arguing it was her due, but the court saw little justification for it since their incomes were nearly equivalent. Undeterred, she tried contacting him through various social media platforms, creating multiple accounts to bypass his blocks, but he remained steadfast, blocking each one. Occasionally, she resorted to texting from fake accounts or sending emails that likely ended up in his spam folder, but he had effectively made himself unreachable to her. 3 years ago, I entered the picture through a serendipitous encounter facilitated by his cousin, a college friend of mine. We were both invited to her wedding, and as fate would have it, we were seated at the same table. From the moment we started talking, there was an undeniable spark. He was witty, charming, and had an easygoing nature that drew me in instantly. We exchanged numbers that evening, but he was cautious about diving into anything serious too quickly, a hesitation shaped by his past experiences. I appreciated his need for time, and we took things slowly, building a foundation of trust and connection. Over the next 3 years, our bond deepened, culminating in a joyful marriage. Had it not been for an unsettling incident at our wedding, I'd likely be basking in the glow of our honeymoon right now, rather than reflecting on this bizarre situation. 2 weeks before the wedding, my routine was disrupted by an unexpected visitor. Terry had already left for work, and I was working from home that day, preparing for an errand across town to pick up some last-minute items for the ceremony. Around midday, the doorbell chimed, and I opened the door to find Eliza standing there. I recognized her immediately from old photos I'd seen of her with Terry. Her presence was jarring, and for a moment, I was too stunned to react. She greeted me with a smug, almost theatrical smile before asking if I was Courtney. When I confirmed, she stepped uncomfortably close, her voice dripping with insinuation as she claimed to know my dirty little secret. Her words caught me off guard, and I stared at her, puzzled, trying to decipher what she meant. Then she mentioned Sam, a man I'd briefly gone out with just weeks before meeting Terry. Sam and I had connected through a dating app, exchanging messages for a few days before agreeing to meet for a date. The evening was lackluster, conversation with him felt forced, and there was no chemistry. When I got home, I decided not to pursue things further. I sent him a polite message, saying I wasn't looking for anything serious, which wasn't entirely honest but seemed like a gentle way to end things. He responded that he was also interested in something casual and kept texting, but I didn't reply, effectively ghosting him. It wasn't my finest moment, but it was just one date, not a long-term commitment. I didn't see it as a significant issue, nor did I think it warranted being labeled a dirty secret. It was a fleeting encounter that happened shortly before I met Terry, and while I'd mentioned to him in passing that I'd been dating others during that time, I never felt the need to delve into specifics about Sam. In the grand scheme of things, it was an inconsequential blip, a common occurrence in the world of modern dating. Yet, standing there on my doorstep, Eliza seemed to believe she'd uncovered something scandalous, and her accusatory tone left me grappling with how she'd even come to know about Sam in the first place. The encounter with Eliza stirred a mix of confusion and unease. How had she tracked me down? Why was she so invested in digging up a trivial detail from my past? Her smug demeanor suggested she thought she held some kind of leverage, but I couldn't fathom why she'd go to such lengths. It wasn't as if I'd hidden some dark, shameful secret, I'd simply moved on from a lackluster date. Still, her presence and her cryptic accusations left me unsettled, especially so close to the wedding. I couldn't help but wonder if she'd been keeping tabs on Terry or me all these years, waiting for an opportunity to stir trouble. The fact that she'd shown up at my home, uninvited and unannounced, hinted at a level of obsession that was both alarming and perplexing. As I processed the interaction, I realized this wasn't just about Sam. It was about her unresolved feelings about Terry and the divorce, projected onto me in a way that felt both personal and vindictive. For now, though, I had a wedding to focus on, and I wasn't about to let her cryptic confrontation derail the happiness Terry and I had built together. I was very confused when Eliza called Sam my dirty little secret, and I was still trying to process it when she cleared it up for me by saying that Sam was a good friend of hers now and she knew that I'd been two-timing Terry and going out with Sam at the same time as him. She then hinted that she was going to tell Terry and make sure she ruined our wedding. At that point, I started laughing because this was all so dramatic and unnecessary. It just felt like something straight out of a soap opera, and I couldn't help but laugh out loud at her strategy to meddle in our relationship. I remember she started looking really annoyed when I laughed at her and straight up threatened to tell Terry if I didn't tell him myself and cancel this wedding. But I'd had enough by then, so I told her to get the hell out and slammed the door shut in her face. She left afterward, but I didn't tell Terry about her visit when he came back home. I figured she wouldn't be bothering me anymore, so there was no need for me to bring this up and mess with our good energy right before the wedding. So, he remained blissfully unaware of Eliza's visit, and things were going so well for us until the day of the wedding. I'd walked down the aisle, tears had been shed, and we were about to get to the vows when Eliza walked in, screeching that we needed to stop the ceremony. We were all stunned, and even more so when we noticed the clueless little boy whose hand she was holding. She looked like she'd won the lottery when all of us stopped and turned to check out what the fuss was about. She went on to declare that this wedding couldn't take place because apparently, the little boy she had with her was her and Terry's son, whom she'd been raising all on her own for 6 years now. She said that Terry had blocked her everywhere after their divorce, so she'd never been able to find him to tell him that she was pregnant with his baby, but now that she'd finally found him, she knew that she had to stop us from getting married. Terry looked like he was going to barf, and he was so shocked that I knew I had to be the one to step up and take matters into my own hands. There were obviously a bunch of glaring loopholes in whatever story she'd cooked up. If she really had been raising his kid for so long, then why hadn't she contacted him for child support? She'd wanted nothing but to be a housewife and quit her job when she was with Terry, but after she got pregnant, she was suddenly ready to be a career woman and a single mother? Yeah, it seems very likely that a change like that just happened overnight, and she suddenly had the motivation and ambition to juggle everything all on her own. Besides, she'd been hell-bent on getting alimony, but after she found herself pregnant, she suddenly didn't care about the money and let the child support go to hell because she couldn't find Terry? I called BS on that. If she'd really wanted to, then she would have found out where Terry was by hook or by crook and wouldn't have just given up trying. She'd very easily been able to find out our address to visit me before the wedding, and she could have shown up after that day too, but she'd chosen the day of our wedding specifically, of course, for nothing other than dramatic effect. Because deep down, she couldn't stand the fact that Terry was getting married again to another woman and that he'd really and truly moved on from her. I told her that I knew for a fact that she was lying about the child being his as well, and one paternity test would be enough to prove that. It was upsetting for everyone involved, but I had to say it to her. In response, she told me to stay out of this, as this had nothing to do with me, which was such a hilarious thing to say in the middle of my wedding. Then she pushed me aside so she could make her way to the stage, which is where she screwed up royally because I get very triggered if anyone physically attacks me. I instantly grabbed her and pushed her right back and then slapped her twice. Luckily, the boy she had come with had been taken aside by one of the guests in the catfight that happened next. She tried to slap me back, but by then, people had started getting up, and someone grabbed her to restrain her while Terry took me away. We were getting married in the backyard of our house because it was big enough to accommodate the number of guests we had. It was a small and intimate wedding anyway, and while Terry was taking me away in the middle of all the chaos, I felt grateful that there were not many people present to witness this very embarrassing temper tantrum of mine. Once Terry and I were inside the house, he calmed me down for the next couple of minutes because I was still red in the face and mumbling about him letting me have another go at Eliza. A few minutes later, my parents came inside the house, and Terry left to deal with the commotion outside. Finally, about 20 minutes and a lot of shouting later, Terry came back in, and he looked very upset. The two of us and all the other guests decided to take a breather before we went ahead with the vows. What had taken place right before that had been upsetting, but if we postponed or canceled the wedding that day, then she'd win, and we didn't want that. We also had a few guests who had traveled a long way to be there for us on our special day, and we didn't want to let them down. So, we took 10 minutes and then went ahead with the wedding like we'd planned. The vows meant a lot to us this time around because we'd just proven exactly how much faith we had in each other. We'd pretty much demonstrated our love and trust right before the wedding, and the vows just felt like verbalizing whatever we'd felt while I was defending him and probably what he had felt when he was kicking Eliza out. I loved him, he loved me, and our wedding was a celebration of that. Everything else could wait. So, that's exactly the thought process we went ahead with, and we got married that day. It wasn't until 2 days later that we finally decided to bother ourselves with Eliza and how exactly she'd managed to find us or why she'd shown up after so long. A friend of Terry's actually confessed to him 2 days after the incident that it had been him who had let slip to Eliza that he was getting married. He hadn't said anything during the wedding and the time period after it because he was too embarrassed that one mistake of his had led to such a scene. He apologized, but it really meant nothing because he'd let us both down. Apparently, Eliza had been talking about Terry to her friends even until recently and had been saying that she knew they were meant to be together eventually. So, that friend felt that it was his moral obligation to let her know that we were getting married and that Terry had moved on so she wouldn't continue to have any false hopes. We've decided to make sure nothing about Terry's life reaches Eliza, so we've cut him out of our lives, and that's that. I wanted to go to the cops, but Terry said we should just let this be because he doesn't want any more drama. But he wasn't the one to give Eliza my address or my one date with Sam. That was Sam himself. Now, coming to the thing about Sam, apparently, he's Eliza's third cousin, and somehow, they discovered this connection about me when they met at some family event a few weeks ago. They weren't close, but since Eliza looked depressed, they got to talking. Eliza had been telling him about how she just learned that the love of her life was getting married to someone else, and then she showed Sam a picture of Terry with me, which is what she'd received from Terry's friend. Of course, he recognized me and told her all about it. Sam knew that we were getting married because we still followed each other on Facebook until the wedding. He was the one to share my address with Eliza when she asked because she claimed that she wanted to visit Terry before he got married and talk to him one last time. I've been living in the same place ever since I got my first job, so a lot of people know where I live, and Sam had dropped me home after our first date, so that's how he knew. He told me he'd given her my address because he didn't think she'd do anything on the day of the wedding but only mess with me a little before it. He said he'd underestimated just how insane she was and had texted me to apologize for it. He also told me that the boy she'd brought along with her was a son of one of their relatives, whom she'd claimed to be babysitting, but once she dropped the kid off at his parents', he told his parents what he'd seen, and then Eliza had been forced to tell all her family about what had happened at the wedding. She didn't have any regrets about it either, but when Sam found out what had happened, he started feeling guilty and decided to text me about it, and that's how I found out about everything. The real problem is that Sam only texted me yesterday, and 2 days ago, Terry and I left for our honeymoon, which we are currently supposed to be enjoying, but we're not because he's mad at me. Yesterday, I finally told him about Eliza's first visit to our house, and he was really mad because he thinks I should have told him that day itself, and then maybe we could have avoided the fiasco at the wedding. I tried to explain to him that I was just trying to protect him and make sure we kept the negativity away from our lives. Like Sam, even I didn't think Eliza would actually turn out to be such a huge nut job and do what she did at the wedding. We got into an argument about it last night when he told me that this whole thing could have been avoided if I'd just been transparent with him instead of trying to protect a grown man. While I do agree with that, I don't think it's fair to put the entire blame on my shoulders. After all, it was his friend who told Eliza that there was a wedding happening. Had he not told her that, then she wouldn't have been depressed and wouldn't have talked to Sam about their family thing, and they never would have discovered the common link between all of this. Then maybe the incident at the wedding wouldn't have taken place at all. So, I don't think it's completely my fault for not telling Terry about Eliza's first visit. We did speak before bed last night and made up, but he's still really off, and I can't put up with this sort of distant behavior, not on what's supposed to be a happy occasion. At the very least, Eliza already ruined a part of my wedding, and I don't want to let her ruin my honeymoon as well, but it feels like she's succeeding. Am I the asshole for not telling my husband about his ex-wife's first visit to us and her threat to break us up because I didn't want him to worry without reason? Okay, so this is a day after I posted here on Reddit, and I've spoken to Terry about what happened. I was feeling really upset about everything because it had never been my intention to lie to Terry about Eliza's visit. I just didn't want him to feel weird about it and ruin our happy mojo just a couple of days before our wedding, and I didn't want that to get in the way of us enjoying our honeymoon. So, I talked to him about it and explained to him why I'd done what I'd done. We'd made up the previous day, but I didn't think it had been effective enough. Today, I found out that it was actually a lot of other things weighing on his mind too that were making him feel awful. For instance, He'd found out from his ex-mother-in-law a couple of days before that Eliza had gone on an anger-fueled rampage the day she was sent back home from our wedding and had broken a lot of furniture and crockery in her fit before breaking down. She was still really torn up over it, and on top of that, her other relatives were also not speaking to her anymore because she'd taken the boy she was supposed to be babysitting with her to our wedding. For some reason, the woman was blaming Terry for all of it. She believes that he'd been too quick to give up on their relationship, and that's what had caused all of this. Terry's been feeling like crap about these accusations because he thinks that to a certain extent, he might be responsible for what's going on with Eliza right now. He'd said a lot of horrible things to her on the day of our wedding while I was inside the house, and of course, there was also the friend that we'd had to cut off because he'd been such a colossal idiot and was now talking crap about Terry, even though he and Terry had been really good friends in the past. He'd found out from another friend that he'd pretty much been the hot topic back home, and everyone was having the time of their lives discussing the embarrassing incident at our wedding in great detail. Even people he barely knew were talking about it, and only our close friends had been invited to the wedding, so it was obvious that they'd been gossiping about it too. It's just sad, and I totally get why he was acting weird about these things. Terry is a sensitive guy, and that's one of the things I love most about him, but he can also sometimes let things really get under his skin, which isn't healthy. So, I sat him down and told him that people are obviously going to have a heck of a time talking about us behind our backs, but at the end of the day, what matters is if we have each other's backs or not. He's the one I married, and quite frankly, I couldn't care less if someone else is talking about me or not, and neither should he. The only thing we can do is not let this bother us and get in the way of our fun so we can make the best of our honeymoon because this isn't going to come back. Those people are going to talk no matter what, so we might as well have some more fun and give them something to talk about. This cheered him up considerably, so now we're heading out to the beach for the evening and are probably going to get drunk and dance the night away with a bunch of total strangers just for fun. So, we're back from our honeymoon, and we've decided to have a ceremony again. Yep, we're going to take 3 now, but this time, it's just going to be family and nobody else. We've realized that if our friends are the kind of people who would relish the opportunity to gossip about us more than value our privacy, then they're probably not the kind of people we want around us anyway. Terry and I are private people, and our wedding was really small in the beginning, but if we can't even trust a handful of friends we had invited, then I think we need to redo it all together just for ourselves and our families. My parents think it's a great idea, and they do too. They've even offered to help us fund this one because we paid for the first one ourselves. It wasn't much anyway the first time around because of the size of the wedding, and this time, it's barely going to cost us a thing because we're going even smaller and even more private, but at least when we look back on our wedding, we won't have to think of our vows being interrupted by Eliza's entry or our friends who turned out to be traitors or Sam who was a huge jerk. We'll just look back on us and our families, and that'll be it. So, I think it's totally worth it to have another ceremony now. Hey, everyone, we went through with our wedding, and this time, there was nothing else to worry about. It was just us, our families, and my best friend from childhood, but she's pretty much family anyway, so it doesn't count. Terry and I are really happy that we did this, and we're looking forward to being a proper married couple now. As for Eliza, the last we heard was that she and her mother had moved to Brooklyn to be with her father, who had been working there. Her mother had apparently forced her to come along because she didn't think the woman was stable enough to be left alone, and I really can't blame her for thinking that way about her own daughter. Eliza had sent Terry an email a few days back to tell him that he'd regret whatever he'd done to her and that she knew that they were meant to be. She'd also told him whatever I just mentioned above because she wanted him to know that she was not moving away of her own free will but was being forced to, and since she still heavily relied on her parents for money, she couldn't just say no to them. So, she had to go. She'd even attached her new address in Brooklyn in case Terry changed his mind about me and wanted to patch up. It was ridiculous, and I just decided to ignore the email because there was only so much blocking we could do. We're just going to ignore her for the rest of our lives because now there's not much she can do to get under our skin. Terry and I are happy together, and that's all we care about.